Hello, everyone. We're going to have day 3 of our World War II lecture momentarily, but my son wanted to start things off with another fun fact for you all. So here's Matthew with your moment of Matthew.
Remember, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence.
There you
like
go.
a national treasure.
There you go. And Charlie's also here with us. He's on the ground right now. Charlie, do you want to say hi again? Come here.
Yes, I want to say hi again.
He's kind of taking a nap on the ground, but maybe towards the end I'll get him to come up.
Yeah.
All right, Matthew. I got to post my video now.
Bye. Whee!
All right, so you guys remember yesterday we left off with World War II on the home front. Today we got to talk about some battles. And there is a whole lot of history here in what I'm going to attempt to cover today. I mean, think of like, oh, there's my dog. Hey, Charlie, go on. Kelly, will you get the dog? Okay, will you shut that?
Yes.
Thank you. So anyway, starting things off with a whole lot of battles. I can think of dozens and dozens of movies that cover all of this, one of which we just watched in my movie club, Midway, depicting what was going on in the Pacific. And that's where I think we need to begin, because the attack in the Pacific is what got us into World War II. As you're looking at this kind of chaotic and hectic map, this is where Japan attacked us. So you see Pearl Harbor. They attacked us, of course, December 7th, 1941. And the other interesting thing to note with this is the line, kind of the border line here. That's the far reach of the Japanese Empire. And they had a whole lot of territory. In fact, they were on the offensive for several years before we could really even launch a counterattack. So just look how much they had. They've got parts of China. They've got most of Southeast Asia. And if you notice up here, that's even part of Alaska. So they've got part of the Aleutians. Simply put, it's going to be difficult for us to take that territory back. Now, one thing you need to note when looking at all of this is our strategy in getting to Japan. And the notable term for you is island hopping. So we launch an island hopping campaign, going from small strategic island to the next, to the next, to the next, until we can finally bomb mainland Japan into submission. So just looking at this hectic map, understand the task is going to be difficult, and we enact an island hopping campaign to get back all of this territory. Okay, in this wordy slide, again, focus on what's underlined, but Imperial Japan, they are gaining ground quickly. So they attack Pearl Harbor, Guam, Wake Island, Malaya, Dutch East Indies, Hong Kong. They've got it all, as you just saw on the map there. Let's note something about the Philippines, keeping in mind that that was our territory, and we had a really big name in the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur. See how he's underlined? I'd like you to know something about General Douglas MacArthur. He's in charge. He's got 20,000 troops on the island. Japan overwhelms the Philippines, and he's going to have to evacuate, and these 20,000 troops are going to be taken captive. So MacArthur, when he leaves, he's going to evacuate to Australia. He has a really famous quote where he says, "I shall return to the Philippines." So just think, General MacArthur, Philippines, I shall return. And all of these 20,000 troops are then marched on the infamous Bataan Death March, where they're prisoners of war. As you can see, POW, prisoners of war. It's bad. I'll show you a few pictures of that in a second. If you watch the movie Midway, you saw a pretty good depiction of the Doolittle raid. That's our first counterattack, where we were able to drop a couple of bombs on mainland Japan. It's not going to, cause catastrophic damage, but it will boost morale. And as for the Doolittle raiders, they're going to have to crash land in China, some of whom were taken captive. So just, if you saw the movie, you got a very good understanding of it. If you have not seen the movie, maybe you want to watch it. But the Doolittle raid, it's our first counterattack. What's it do? It does little, but it does boost morale. So Doolittle raid. And then again, the movie Midway, it's all about the Battle of Midway. That's our turning point in the entire Pacific. We had cracked the Japanese naval code. We knew exactly where they were going to attack, so we stationed our fleet prepping for it, and were able to take out a number of their carriers. So in this several-day battle, Battle of Midway, it stops the Japanese advance, and we're going to be moving slowly but surely closer and closer to mainland Japan thereafter. So turning point of the Pacific, I would note something about that. And if you're curious of our naval admiral in charge of all of this, it's Texas's own Chester Nimitz from Fredericksburg. If you've ever been to Fredericksburg, there's a World War II museum. His family was from there. So Chester Nimitz, he launches the island hopping campaign. There's Jimmy Doolittle and the Doolittle Raiders. There's the Bataan Death March. And again, 76,000 prisoners, a number of Americans. It's called the Bataan Death March for a reason. A number do die. Pictures from Bataan. You can see a lot of emaciated, even beaten, tortured soldiers. There's a lot out there on it. It was pretty bad, as the Japanese did not exactly treat their prisoners of war in a humane way. There was a lot of beating, torturing. And I think one of your English classes had you read Unbroken, or if you've seen that movie, you saw, several bits and pieces of how the Japanese would treat the prisoners. Here again, Midway, I would really recommend the movie. It'll go into a lot of the detail of how we're able to crack that naval code and actually win this thing. All right, here's just, again, one simple slide of the names. I have all of these in Quizlet. Hopefully you still remember Quizlet. You can log in and possibly memorize. Hirohito is the Japanese emperor who they thought was a god. Yamamoto, I covered him yesterday with the architect of Pearl Harbor. Hideki Tojo with the Japanese army. And as for the big American names, we've got Nimitz and MacArthur. Yes, there are many, many more names that we could cover, but we're just getting bits and pieces in this survey course on what's going on in the Pacific. As for Europe, we don't jump right into Germany. We have to attack the periphery first. And the notable thing, we have to kind of get our practice, because our guys were not all that well trained. In fact, in the early stages of the war, we're practicing by throwing tin cans with nails in it to pretend they're grenades. So we couldn't jump right in to fight, the Nazi blitzkrieg style. That would be incredibly difficult. So we go into North Africa first, attacking the periphery, slowly making our way until we can attack the soft underbelly of Italy. So this will be a several-year thing. North Africa, then Italy, and of course, eventually we'll have D-Day, where we attack France and take all that territory back. So just understand kind of the process here. All right, so as for Europe, there again, North Africa, Operation Torch. A few more names for you. I know you all love to memorize names, but there's so much out there on these guys, especially George Patton. Great movie, titled Patton. If you want to know anything about him attacking in North Africa, Patton goes after the Nazi Erwin Rommel, nicknamed the Desert Fox. And at this point, we're all under the command of the British General Bernard Montgomery. Patton, very, very colorful character, as you'll see, or as you may have seen in that movie. One famed scene from the movie, he's, a top American general. He doesn't bunker down. He runs out and is chasing around Nazi planes, shooting them with his handgun. Interesting guy, to say the least. More on him in a bit. As for our invasion of the soft underbelly of Europe, our invasion of Italy, we start in Sicily, and you kind of get an interesting side note here with the help of the American mafia. This was the top mafia don in the United States, and we were actually able to let him out of prison to kind of coordinate our attack of Sicily. So there's a lot out there on this. Again, it gets us on a bit of a tangent, but if you're at all interested in that stuff, the movie The Godfather could, kind of pave the way to that story. But pretty interesting stuff, a lot out there on Lucky Luciano and the American mafia helping us actually invade Italy. And as for the big three leaders, I'll give you a picture of these guys in a second. but they're gonna like meet and plan out the war. Now, the big three leaders in your mind, you're thinking, oh, I have no idea who they are. Of course, you got the American leader. Are you asking yourself who the American president is? Of course, it's FDR. British. Who's the British leader? I've mentioned him several times. Winston Churchill. And lastly, the Russian leader, you probably remember Joseph Stalin. So three guys, all kind of different in their own way. They're going to meet in a series of these conferences. More on Yalta and Potsdam later, because as we're meeting with the Soviets there, we're going to have all these problems, and that will transition us to the Cold War. Here it is as a whole, looking at what's going on. Again, we attack the periphery, North Africa, eventually getting to Italy. We'll kind of stall out in the mountains of Italy here. And then this will be our main front attack, D-Day. And once D-Day happens, we'll be pushing the lines closer and closer to Germany with really every single day. And think about the scope of this whole thing, because Germany also had attacked the Soviet Union, pushing all the way almost to Moscow. But maybe world history taught you about the defense of Stalingrad and how Hitler loses his entire Eastern army by getting surrounded at Stalingrad. Kind of the historic lesson is don't invade the Soviet Union in winter. You will get stuck. Remember Napoleon? So, yeah, the Nazis did the same thing. Soviets hold out at Stalingrad, and eventually they're pushing the line closer and closer to Germany, as we're going to be doing the same thing from this way. So, huge war, keeping in mind that we're also fighting in the Pacific at the same time. So, it does take literally every single resource of the country to fight and win this thing. There you have your big three: Roosevelt, Stalin, Churchill. As for D-Day, have you seen any movies about D-Day? There are a lot of good ones. Saving Private Ryan might be, the most graphic first 45-minute depiction of our storming the beaches. I highly recommend that one if you're bored and you're looking for a war movie to watch. I think you would like Saving Private Ryan. But here are the soldiers kind of jumping out of these Higgins boats, wading through the water, trying to get to the beaches. There's our top general, the guy in charge of D-Day, Dwight D. Eisenhower, nicknamed Ike. He becomes so well known and admired because of this, he'll eventually be president. So let's remember Dwight D. Eisenhower, top Allied commander, Ike. And as for the invasion of Normandy, holy cow, it's big. No, I wouldn't test you on all those things, but just note that it's the largest invasion in history with, 175,000 troops, 1,500 tanks, 7,000 ships, 12,000 airplanes, 23,000 airborne troops. 23,000 airborne troops. Have any of you seen Band of Brothers? The entire movie or series Band of Brothers covers these airborne troops as they drop behind enemy lines, fighting their way back in, trying to take out the big guns that were pointed at the troops on shore. I think you would love Band of Brothers if you have any interest on this. I think you could find it on Amazon Prime if you have that. So anyway, lots out there. We're just scratching the surface, covering a little bit of detail. But yes, you should know D-Day, largest invasion ever. Remember General Eisenhower. And yes, let's note that year as well, June 6, 1944. Ask yourself, when did we join the war? You remember, December 7th, 1941, we're attacked. The next day we declare war. It takes us this long to finally attack mainland Europe. So it took a whole lot of prep, a whole lot of effort, but finally we're making a lot of progress. We had a little bit of trickery. Maybe you know the story of Patton's Phantom Army, where for whatever reason the Nazis were petrified of General Patton. They were confident that if we lead an assault, Patton is going to be the one leading this whole thing. So we knew that, and we actually floated over some fake battle plans. So the Nazis move a lot of their troops right here, thinking that Patton, who's in charge at this point of fake tanks and fake boats and tents with nobody in it, but yes, he was there. So the Nazis kind of move a lot of guys, paving our way for the attack on these 5 beaches at Normandy. So the Phantom Army, another kind of interesting side note of the whole thing. And maybe you remember a little bit about these actual beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. I wouldn't test you on that, but you've probably heard it at some point. Again, this is what it looks like. Very difficult. This would prevent some of our landing crafts from being all the way on shore. It would, rip open the bottom of them. Big guns obviously pointed at us. Hitler had a long time to defend the Atlantic Wall. So Erwin Rommel, that Desert Fox guy, is in charge of defending the entire Atlantic coast. So guns like this pointed at all the troops trying to land. It would be an incredibly difficult task to try to take out these guns and, somehow make your way forward. That's Rommel. There's Eisenhower. And this one just shows you the scope of the whole thing. So you see all the, tanks moving forward, all of the ships. These are barrage balloons, if you're curious to what those are. But yeah, it's the largest invasion in history to that point. As we're marching across Europe, Patton is the man. And Patton, again, really, really fascinating with how he wants to move forward. He thinks he's like reincarnated from other historic figures, but he is getting the job done. Of course, there was some controversy with Patton. One of the more famous stories is when he slaps a PTSD soldier and knocks his helmet off his head, and Patton actually had to apologize for that, and one of his stars was taken away. So he was like a 4-star general. He was demoted down to a 3-star general. So Patton is moving quickly across Europe. Of course, the guy's controversial. And look, we're able to liberate Paris by August of 1944. Now, Patton, he actually credits the Red Ball Express for helping liberate Europe so quickly. And if you recall, we still had a segregated military. The Red Ball Express was largely made up of African Americans who were keeping the supplies moving. Tuskegee Airmen, there are additional African American contribution to the war effort. I think I've covered them in the past, but if you forgot, they're the pilots who are on escorting missions, and they're very, very good at their job. So you got Red Ball Express, Tuskegee Airmen. Just kind of link that to African American contributions in the war effort. There's Patton. This is what some of the fighting would look like, fighting across the hedgerows of France. So as you're like storming across this field, behind a hedgerow would be a Nazi tank division, Panzer division, and then you'd have a lot of tank battles throughout kind of the coast or the centerpiece of Europe there. And there's Patton. May God have mercy upon my enemies, because I won't. Interesting guy. I recommend the movie if you like any of that stuff. Looking at this one, Rise and Fall of the Axis Powers, 1939, remember when the war begins, that's what they have. Wow, 1942, they have just about everything, almost Moscow, almost Great Britain, all of North Africa. But after D-Day, the Soviets are fighting, we're into France, we took North Africa back, that's all that's left. Meanwhile, there's an election. And it's always crazy to go back to this thinking, wow, there's an election during this whole thing. Yes, no matter what crisis we've had, we've always been able to have that election. So FDR, he's kind of dying at this point. So there was extra focus on who his vice president would be. Do you recognize him? Gutty guy from Missouri, Harry Truman. So let's note Harry Truman is going to be the vice president who eventually takes over when FDR dies. And this, of course, is the election of 1944. FDR runs, wins, 4th time in a row. Impressive. All right. Eventual victory in Europe. You get a sustained bombing campaign, and some of this bombing gets a little controversial, especially if you look at Dresden. So again, you can look at a lot of the controversies of the bombing, where we firebombed kind of a artistic type city without any real military targets, completely leveling it. So an ugly note of this is the civilian casualties, where think about World War II resulting in the most civilian death of any war to this point. I'll show you a chart in a bit, but we're talking like 60 million plus. So that's a whole lot of civilians dying. And Dresden is just one of those cities where us, the Brits, we bomb them to submission. So Nazi Germany is weakening without a doubt. Yet they are able to launch one more counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge. They're able to bulge the line outward for a little bit, and after that, there's nothing left. So the war in Europe, it's ending by January 1945. You'll see it'll be done by May. May 8th, 1945, VE Day, victory in Europe. FDR had died. He had died 1 month earlier, so he did not see the end of the war in Europe. But basically understand, once we got through on D-Day, it's the beginning of the end for the Nazis. This is Dresden, by the way, kind of a like after and future type thing. But it shows you the absolute destruction of Dresden, and yes, it was later rebuilt. As for the Pacific, you got several differences, one of which these landing craft won't work as well because these small islands that we're trying to invade are surrounded by coral reefs. So some of the first ones we attack, these guys have to get out in neck deep water, swimming, trying to dodge machine gun fire, and it's going to be kind of a bloodbath as they're going to these small little blip islands in the middle of the Pacific. So you got that issue. And you got a different type of enemy, one of which does not surrender. This guy continued fighting World War II 29 years after the Japanese had surrendered. Now, he, of course, is the extreme example, but here's the thing. The Nazis would surrender. They would raise the white flag. They would ultimately surrender by the thousands. The Japanese will fight to the very last man. And if a few are left, many would choose to kill themselves rather than surrendering to the Americans. Maybe if you saw Midway, you vaguely recall some of the pilots crashing into planes. Those were kamikazes. So just understand that the Japanese, they're not willing to surrender, and it's going to be a very, very difficult fight in this island hopping campaign. As for the kamikazes, well, sound effects for you. And here's MacArthur. There's MacArthur, always dramatic. He does make his re-entrance into the Philippines, and we're gradually taking our territory back in this island hopping campaign. Now, victory is going to come, yes, with some island hopping. We are bombing them significantly, but they're still not surrendering. In fact, if you look at a map, we're not even to mainland Japan yet. So we're bombing Tokyo, but our men are not yet there. So just understand, we're slowly getting there. Iwo Jima, small Japanese-controlled island, as was Okinawa. March 1945, June 1945, a ton of bloodshed in just trying to take these small little strategic islands. Now, they say if we were to invade mainland Japan, they would need a force like 3 times the size of D-Day, where, possibly 1 million men would be needed, and the casualties would just be so significant, it would take a monumental effort to get Japan to surrender. So at this time, they're kind of planning something else. Many of you probably know what I'm thinking. They're planning something else. Something else is about to be tested in the desert in the United States, and they will ultimately use that to get Japan to surrender. So again, just think, they refuse to surrender. Mass death tolls. You can see kind of 110,000. That's their numbers versus our numbers. 25% casualties, that's huge, without a doubt. And they do essentially fight to the last man. Okinawa, 20% casualties. Wow. And again, 90% dead. There's terrible video. In fact, one of the videos I think I'm posting tomorrow notes the civilians in the war. You see entire families like jumping off cliffs because they did not want to surrender. So ugly, ugly stuff in World War II, without a doubt, but we do need to be aware of some of this. And again, here we are, island hopping our way closer and closer to mainland Japan, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and you kind of see what's about to happen of how they will eventually surrender. It's our plan for the atomic bomb. If you read chapter 1 of the book that some of you have, it was mentioning the Manhattan Project, on how a notable Jewish refugee told FDR of the Nazis trying to develop an atomic bomb. So we started as well. So Albert Einstein, he warns FDR, and we have this huge multi-billion-dollar project led by Robert Oppenheimer. Robert Oppenheimer is the top scientist in charge of developing this thing. We eventually are able to test a weapon in the desert in New Mexico in July of 1945, and then we use it shortly after. So just think, billions of dollars, 100,000 workers, all trying to keep this thing secret. Why does Harry Truman use it? To save lives, and it does end the war. So just think of the amount of American lives that would be lost if we had to invade mainland Japan. It would be, through the roof. So yes, the destruction from these bombs will be significant. They're the only two dropped in war in all of history, but it does technically end World War II. Not without controversy. Of course, some say that we didn't have to use it. Truman says that he was justified so that he could end the war. There's one of our tests, ton of video out there on this. I'll show you some of the video when we get to the Cold War. We did warn Japan that we were about to drop one of these things, warning them about the, power of these bombs. And here they are, Little Boy and Fat Man, code names of the bombs. Little Boy drops on Hiroshima, and just kind of look at some of the numbers. It instantly incinerates everything in its path, and then this firestorm will destroy everything outside the path. So 7,200 degrees, 620-mile-an-hour wind. Wow, look at those numbers. 70,000 killed instantly, 60,000 later die from radiation. They still don't surrender. So we have to drop another one, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. Tens of thousands die again shortly after they will surrender. So it took two bombs, the only two dropped in all of history in actual war. Yes, there was a whole lot of testing, but this is what ends World War II. And now you have VJ Day, victory over Japan, August 14th, 1945. Show you some of the pictures here. This was a before, now and after. So completely wiped out to the ground. Not much was left standing. This one's kind of interesting, where it shows you the impact. Now you can actually compare that to what a bomb today would do. And this is some messed up stuff, but I just think for perspective, it can show you that, yes, this is a big bomb, but this is what our largest bomb today would do. So yeah, I simulated what a bomb today, and again, the largest bombs today, just kind of look at this compared, and then I'll go back. That's what the Hiroshima bomb would do. So we're talking, yes, catastrophic. In a highly urbanized area, that could be devastating, but we're talking what, several square miles? Go back to what our biggest bombs today can do, and whoa, that's a whole lot of destruction. So again, we have not used these in warfare today, but a lot of countries do have them. Kind of a scary, not so reassuring thought, but it is out there, something to be aware of. Some of the radiation poisoning, difficult pictures to look at. Again, many do die in the aftermath of all of this as well. Now they do surrender. That is the end of World War II. Americans come home and celebrate this shortly after. Famed picture. All right, so in the aftermath, it's really the United States and the Soviet Union. And they are the last two superpowers. It's not so much the Brits anymore, because they were, kind of dead broke and wiped out as a result of being attacked from Germany all that time. So the two leftover superpowers are going to battle it out in the upcoming Cold War, which will last about 40 plus years. So more on that next week. But just kind of look at the numbers. 418,000 soldiers died, 16 million involved. Let me show you a chart on that in a second. More civilians killed than soldiers. And oh, by the way, the Holocaust. Did we know about it? Did we do much about it? I don't want to get too off the curriculum for American history, but I think you need to be aware that, yes, we did know about it. In fact, it was published in newspapers. We were aware of the death tolls, but again, we did not lift our immigration quotas, and a lot of the Jewish refugees trying to come over were turned away. I showed you guys that video of the St. Louis, some 900 tried to come over. We said no, most end up dying in the Holocaust. So You got some ugly stuff. I think I have just a couple pictures about, the civilian death toll. I wrote that on there for you. China, huge loss of life. Soviet Union, Germany, where are we? Kind of small in the whole scale of things. Fraction of various countries' population that died in World War II. Wow, 85 million. It's showing you that nearly, 30% of Belarus died. Huge percentage of Poland died. So lots and lots of stuff that you can look at with the death toll. And of course, about 11 million die in the Holocaust. 6 million Jews, 5 million non-Jews. There's that St. Louis again. Here's some of the newspaper headlines. Germans murder 700,000 Jews in Poland. But notice that's kind of a small blip in the newspaper. Not too many took notice, and there was minimal action in the United States. Now, you did have a few people in the State Department helping out, but we didn't change immigration quotas, and we did not do too much to, grant asylum to all of the Jewish refugees. It was reported that there were roundups, gassings, the disappearance of 90% of Warsaw's ghetto on page 10 of our newspaper. Here's the extermination of 2 million Jews. 5 million more faced extermination on page 20 in our newspaper. That was in the New York Times. So, yes, we did know about it. What could we have done? They say we could have bombed rail lines. We could have bombed the gas chambers. And the U.S. has faced a little bit of criticism for not doing what it potentially could have done. And again, Hitler announced all this stuff. His Wannsee conference, he noted that he wanted to kill all of the Jews. Here's the one thing that we do. We create the War Refugee Board, but it was underfunded, and most Americans were actually against helping Jews. We saved 150,000. How many died? A lot. So, War Refugee Board, what do? We do a little bit to help out. That's kind of the end story of the whole thing. I know that was fast. I know that was a lot of information, but again, it's a survey course. Maybe look back through Quizlet, look at what was underlined on this, and if you can, that supplemental reading will help you out quite a bit. I'll probably post chapters 2, maybe chapter 3 as well. They're both kind of short and sweet, but they'll reinforce everything I said, and I'll post a couple of videos tomorrow that will also reinforce this. So no lecture tomorrow. I'm going to give you a video. Watch that, and I think that you'll have at least a decent understanding of World War II. But please remember, this is a huge topic. I've seen entire college semester courses just on World War II. So you can study this stuff forever. Dozens of movies out there. And again, if you're bored, watch some of those that I mentioned today, and I think you might enjoy it. As always, let me know if you have any questions, any concerns, and I'll try to help you out through this entire process. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.